We're in 2 Samuel chapter 23. We're going to be going through verses 8 through 39, or really we'll be reading 8 through 23, but you can go back and read the other part as homework, as you'll see, and really help you with your pronunciation of names. If you have the issue of trying to pronounce Bible names, maybe that'll help. So I encourage you to go ahead and open up to 2 Samuel chapter 23. Now, my son Levi, many of you know Levi. Levi is he's just an awesome kid. We love him to death, but he is the strongest and fastest human being on earth, at least according to him. That's the way that he believes it. He also believes that he's incredibly good at video games, and honestly, he's surprisingly good at video games. I will admit that, but we kind of go along with it because we don't want to shatter the illusion. And one of the things he loves to do with me and his brother, and because he wants his older brother, he wants to show his older brother that he's so much stronger, is he will just put his elbow on the table, and he'll say that he wants to arm wrestle. And so him and his older brother will arm wrestle, and if his older brother beats him, he will ask for a rematch until he beats his older brother. And so one of the things that we have to do when he arm wrestles me or his brother is we have to act like it's hard. So you got to look like you're struggling. And also when he puts you down, you really got to act upset so that he can say that he wins. Now, when he wins, he shows off by flexing as hard as humanly possible, so hard that you feel like there's a blood vein going to pop in his forehead. He also believes that Usain Bolt is really slow and he is so much faster. He'll challenge you to a race, and what he does is on the mark, say go, and he throws his arms back like Sonic the Hedgehog and runs, usually not looking, just with his eyes closed, a lot of faith, just running straight ahead, no telling what he'll run into, probably a person, maybe something worse. And so he runs as fast as he can, and then if you beat him, all he does is just extends the race a little further so that he can beat you. So then he will call himself the winner. If he plays a video game, gets stuck playing Mario or something along those lines, he'll say, help me, and so we'll help him, and then we'll hand him the control back right at the moment where the thing happens, like the explosion from the boss is happening, and he's like, I did it, like he actually did it. And but all along, we're helping him along with those kinds of things. And we play along with him because we don't want to deal with his wrath, and also he won't let us not play along. Like he will just keep going until we let him win. And it's pretty harmless for him, even though he really didn't do all those things himself. And the truth is, we're kind of all a little bit like Levi in some ways. That we do something we're really proud of. We make an impact in the world. We graduate, we get a promotion, we raise a good kid, find a good spouse, excel in a field, we receive recognition for something that we've done. We're pretty quick to take credit. I did it, right? The longer you walk with God, the more you see that God is the one that gives you the victory. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Today we're going to take a little short detour. We're not going to be really focusing on the life of David, but we're going to be looking at his 30 mighty warriors. These are the warriors that if David wouldn't have had on his side, he would not have been the victorious king that he was. God gifted them to him so that he could do the things he needed to do for God's people and secure the borders and all those things. We're also going to see that these valiant warriors wouldn't have been so amazing and be able to win all these battles if it weren't for the Lord. It was the Lord that is constantly with them that allows them to win the battles. All of it comes back to God. So, if you have your Bibles open, you can turn there to chapter 23, or it will also be up on the screen. Let's start in verse 8. These are the names of David's warriors. Help me on this one. Josheb-Bas Hebeth, the Takmanite. I tell you, I practiced that. I promise, I practiced that. So anytime you're reading in community group or by yourself and you get to a word you don't know, just know that the pastor, who has a master's degree in theology and biblical interpretation, can't pronounce that word. So I'm just going to call him JB, my bro. He's my bro now, JB. All right. Was chief of the officers, and he wielded his spear against 800 men that he killed at one time. After him, Eleazar, son of Dodo, son of Ahohite, was among the three warriors with David when they defied the Philistines. The men of Israel retreated in the place they had gathered for battle. But Eleazar stood his ground and attacked the Philistines until his hand was tired and stuck to his sword. The Lord brought about great victory that day. Then the troops came back to him, but only to plunder the dead. After him was Shema, son of Agi, the Hararite. The Philistines had assembled in formation where there was a field of lentils. The troops fled from the Philistines, but Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field, defended it, and struck down the Philistines. So the Lord brought about great victory. 3 of the 30 leading warriors went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam, where a company of Philistines was camping in the Rephaim Valley. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and a Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David was extremely thirsty and said, "If only someone would bring me water to drink from the well at the city gate of Bethlehem." So 3 of the warriors broke through the Philistine camp and drew water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. They brought it back to David, but he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. And David said, "Lord, I would never do such a thing. Is this not the blood of men who risked their lives?" So he refused to drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 warriors. Abishai, Joab's brother and son of Zeruiah, was leader of the 3. He wielded his spear against 300 men and killed them, gaining a reputation among the 3. He was not more honored than the 3. Was he not more honored than the 3? He became their commander, even though he did not become one of the 3. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was the son of a brave man from Kabzeel, a man of many exploits. Benaiah killed 2 sons of Ariel in Moab, and he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. He also killed an Egyptian, an impressive man. Even though the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went down to him with a staff, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and then killed him with his own spear. These were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, who had a reputation among the 3 warriors. He was the most honored of the 30, but he did not become one of the 3. David put him in charge of his bodyguard. And then the last part of the chapter just goes person after person that are a part of the warriors of David. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Today, God, I pray that you would speak to us through your word as we look at the exploits of these great warriors that stood alongside David. Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn. You would help us to understand not just what happened in this ancient time, but Lord, what it means for us today. So God, I pray that you would open our ears, open our hearts, that we could obey you. Or we wouldn't leave here the same people, but we'd leave changed. The grass withers and the flower fades. The word of our Lord stands forever. Amen. So, one question I often get is, what do we do about all the glorification of war in the Bible? All these guys were warriors, right? And there can be some uncomfortable feelings about something like this. And so we can't go and do an exhaustive study on this, but I want to do some quick points today about war and violence in the Bible. The first thing we always need to realize, especially in the Old Testament, they lived in a brutal world. And it's hard for us to even imagine the kind of world that they lived in that day. By comparison, our world is at peace. In fact, most scholars say that the time that we are currently living in, believe it or not, the time that we are currently living in is the most peaceful time in all of human history, especially if you live in the U.S. You know, the last attack on U.S. soil was 9/11, and it was just terrifying. It's over 20 years ago now. It was incredibly scary for us. But for them, in that day in the Old Testament, any day could be a 9/11 day. So much of the war in the Old Testament, particularly when we read about these heroes, it's like kind of reading about the Avengers in the attack on New York, if you've seen the first Avengers movie, or when they're fighting off Thanos or something like that. These are the heroes. And when we watch those movies, we don't worry about the ethics of when Thor comes in with his axe and chops off Thanos' head, because we understand how evil that Thanos is, right? We actually cheer in the midst of that because we understand the brutality of what Thanos was trying to do. And that's how you can kind of think of these guys. They were heroes that were fighting off against evil. If you want to understand like the world of the Old Testament, this is one reason that I enjoy post-apocalyptic TV shows. I don't know if you've watched any of them, maybe something like Fallout or The Walking Dead or something along those lines. Those are brutal shows, but when you watch them, what I want you to do next time, I want you to think about the Old Testament as you watch them. And Rick Grimes is David. You can think of something like that, right? And when you watch it, not all the violence is justified, and a lot of it is not good. But as you watch it, you begin to understand the context of the world that they live in. And so when we read things like this, and we read passages in the Bible about war and those kinds of things, we can think about the context that all this is happening in. They lived in a brutal, brutal world. It's also, important for us to know that Israel was not a global superpower. A lot of times we like to think of Israel something like the United States of America, and that's just not what it was. It wasn't even anything like Russia or China today. It was more like Taiwan or perhaps Ukraine, where there was this constant fear of the great powers threatening them on a daily basis. And so that's what David is actually told to do by God, is to secure the borders from these invading groups. Also, ultimately in the New Testament, we see that war is not glorified. It's a necessity at times, but it's never the best solution. And peace is what's best. And peace is actually what they're hoping for and striving for. In fact, we see that David isn't even allowed to build the temple because he was a man of bloodshed. So war is not ultimately glorified in the Old Testament. What we also see is that today, we live in the New Testament era. We live in a new covenant. That's what testament means. We live in a new covenant era where things are different. And our battle is no longer against nations. This is going to be really important in just a minute, so I want you to hear this. Our battle is not against nations or people, but it's against powers of darkness in the world. So we fight spiritual enemies. We fight unjust and ungodly philosophies. We fight evil ideas, but we don't fight in the same way that they did in that day. We serve a different country, a country that flies the flag of the Lamb, a heavenly country. We're even told by Jesus that we should pray and love our enemies. Pray for and love our enemies. Because what we do is we understand that they are under the same curse of sin that we are on, and the only solution for any of us is Christ. And Christ who frees us from the power of sin. And so while you read things in the Bible and it can make you uncomfortable, and I really do understand it, helping us get a context for what's happening in terms of war and violence in the Bible can help us see a little clearer what's going on. It's easy for us to think of the time that they lived in exactly like our time, but it was very, very different. And so it's in that context that these warriors go and do all these great feats of honor and valor. So I want to look at a few things today. Some understanding of why they do what they did and how they did what they did, and then what it means to us today. The first thing is this: every meaningful feat is from the Lord. Every meaningful feat is from the Lord. I want to look back at verse 10. It says, Eleazar stood his ground and attacked the Philistines until his hand was tired and stuck to his sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. Then Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field, defended it, and struck down the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. Now you guys, many of you, most of you, are some of the most brilliant people that I have ever met. The most successful people in the world. I am amazed at the people that I preach to on a regular basis. Sometimes we have Harvard professors here, engineers, PhDs, top of your class, world changers. It's quite intimidating, actually, to think that I could get up here and teach you anything. This first hit me for the first time when I was preaching, and I made a quote about some economic stuff, and I think that I was quoted right, but I didn't cite my source, and I go down, I do my whole I'll pray for you at the front thing. So I go stand at the front and praying for people. And I have a person come up to me, a man come up to me and says, hi, I'm an economics professor at Harvard. And I just want to know where you got your statistics from. And I was like, oh boy. I didn't have them on me. I had them at home and I had to go search through it, and I never got them to him because he didn't give me his email or anything. I told him I would get them for him. But that was like the moment I was like, wow, the people I'm preaching to are very brilliant. And I know that that's the way you guys are. As you might say here in New England, you're wicked smart. But there is a danger in that. We begin to think that all these things we did on our own. Like I mentioned earlier, we begin to think that we're, doing it ourselves. And it doesn't mean that you don't do great things. It doesn't mean that you don't attempt great things. It just means that you know that your power for greatness is not in yourself, but ultimately your power for greatness is in the Lord. And even if God never did anything supernatural for you, which I find hard to believe, because if you've ever taken a test, they say that as long as there's tests in schools, there will be prayer in schools. I guarantee you there's a point where you've one time forgot an answer, or you were trying to do some essay or something, and the Lord just miraculously gave you that answer, and you're like, thank you, Jesus, There's probably been something like that along the way. But even if he never did anything supernatural for you, you either won the genetic lottery and you have a brilliant IQ, you won the household lottery and you're born into a wonderful family that was supportive, or you won the geographic lottery and you're just born in the right place, or some combination of the three, or maybe something else. And all of those things are things that are just completely out of your control. They're all in the providence and hands of God, where you were born, how you were born, what you were born into. All of those things you had nothing to do with. And you can't attribute them to yourself. And I don't say that to diminish anyone in here. I don't want to take away from anything that has happened or anything you've done, but I say that to keep us all humble about who we are and where we come from. Because we are nothing without the power of God. These great warriors that we read about today, the greatest of the great, the top 3 in the entire country of Israel, their greatness was attributed to the Lord. There's no greater testimony than when we do something great and we can say and fully accept the Lord brought about this great victory. Now, because the thing is it's sometimes a little bit easy. You see people get Academy Awards. You see them win the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or something like that, and they say, praise God, right? I don't know if they really mean it. But we need to come to a place where we say that we mean it truly, that we couldn't have done it without God. It's a great movie, if you haven't watched it. We actually talked about it in our community group this past week. It's a movie called Chariots of Fire. Just realize that the movie takes place in 1924. It's a movie from the 80s that, if you don't know, it's the famous running song that you always hear during the Olympics and all that stuff. But it takes place in 1924, so it's right at the 100-year anniversary of this. And so it follows Olympic runner Eric Liddell. He was one of the fastest men of his era, and he was also a devout Christian. And he came from missionary parents who were missionaries to China, and his sister wants him to be a missionary, but he wants to go run. And so he says this line, and I just love it so much. I think it's so powerful in terms of helping us understand purpose and how God has made us and how we do the things we do. He says, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. That he saw what he did as an act of worship because God had made him a certain way. He'd go on to win, and then he would go on to be a missionary in China and eventually a martyr for his faith. But Eric knew who gave him victory. God made him fast. God made him fast. And Eric's story leads us to our next point, worship. Every phenomenal exploit is for the Lord. Every phenomenal exploit is for the Lord. I think the most fascinating story in all of these, and maybe the most confusing story in all of these, is the one where they go get water from David's hometown. They say, go to Bethlehem and get me, he's thirsty, but he's really thirsting. Maybe it's the type of nostalgia. He's in this cave. He's supposed to be king, but the Philistines have driven him out, and so he's hiding again, and all this stuff is happening. He's just like, this is not where a king is supposed to be. A king should be able to go to his hometown and go dip water out of the well at any moment he wants to. I yearn for that water at Bethlehem. And so, overhearing this, he never commands it. It's not a command here, but overhearing this, these warriors get an idea. So let's read it again in verse 16. So 3 of the warriors broke through the Philistine camp and drew water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. They brought it back to David, but he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. He pours it out. I would be absolutely livid if I had gone through all that. Think about what's happening here, that they go and they are fighting through the Philistines to get to this well. And he pours it out. That would be the last day I would follow that ungrateful wretch, David. I wouldn't be doing anything for him again. Maybe you feel that way too, but if you feel that way, that's your kind of Western culture brain working there. You see, we don't see any protest here. We don't see any frustration on their part. And actually, it seems like this story is meant to pump these guys up and that they are excited that David has poured this out. I want to show you here what it says about them. We're supposed to stand in awe of these guys. It says, after all this happens and David pours it out, such were the exploits of the three warriors. We're supposed to say, wow, look at these guys. These guys are amazing. They weren't upset. They were honored. Why? Because the greatest compliment that David could give their actions was actually not to drink the water, but to pour it out. Seriously. Anybody in here ever watched Cake Boss before? Okay, it's been off the air for a little while, but I love that show, Cake Boss. Carlos Bakery in Hoboken, New Jersey. We drove by it one time. We didn't actually get to go inside. But anyway, so in Cake Boss, what they do, if you've ever seen it, they make these beautiful cakes. Just absolutely amazing cakes. It's just like this work of artistry. They make statue-looking things and like crazy dragons sometimes. Unbelievable. And what blows my mind about this, when they deliver these cakes to these big parties or whatever, they go in and everybody's like, yay, look at the cake. And then they get a knife and they cut it and they destroy this beautiful work of art. If someone came in with a 6 foot tall by 8 foot wide cake with some massive dragon on it or something, I would just like freeze that thing, or I don't know what I would do. I'd be like, I can't eat this. This is too good. I can't eat this. I can't touch this. That's kind of like what's going on here. Is David sees the action that they've done here, and of course it's like ramped up by 1,000 times, but they went in there and they risked their lives. He says their blood is on this cup. They gave themselves for this, and it tells us he poured it out, but he didn't just pour it out like he's angry. He poured it out to the Lord. See, David here is acting like a priest that pours water out in an act of worship. And what they did was so great that it went beyond the worthiness of a king to drink it. The only one that was worthy to drink from that cup was the Lord himself. And ultimately, the warriors don't get upset about that because they didn't do it for David ultimately. I mean, yeah, they wanted him to have, that'd been special, but they didn't do it for him ultimately. They did it for God. They did it for the Lord. And the greatest possible honor for them was to give it to the Lord, because that whole exploit was an act of worship to the Lord. This helps us understand that worship is more than music on a Sunday morning. I love singing. That's why we do it. And it helps us. I think it stirs our heart with emotion, and we get to think about deeper things than maybe we think during the rest of the week, and it's great. But what we see through this is that everything we do in our lives is an act of worship. Let's read 1 Corinthians 10:31. It says, so whether you eat or drink, those are the most basic functions. He possibly could have said breathe. He doesn't say breathe here, but he gets to the most basic functions. Whether you eat or drink or whatever, everything else, all of those things, you do everything to the glory of God. That everything you do, from the food you eat to every other action, do to the glory of God. That tells us that most of our worship happens Monday through Saturday. It's not just a here on Sunday thing. It happens in our homes. It happens in our relationships, at our jobs. And it's been said that all of life is worship. All of life is worship. All 7 days, 24 hours a day. You sleep in worship. But I don't say that to diminish Sunday morning. Sometimes people can say, oh, well, all life's a worship. Sunday's not important. I want to tell you, Sunday is important. It is commanded by God to gather with his people on a regular basis. It is important for us to get together. And there's actually studies that show that it increases our faith to get together. It brings happiness to sing together. All those things are really good, and God designed it that way for us. So the Sunday morning worship service is important. I don't mean to diminish it, but what I do want to do is I want to help increase and help you understand that the other 6 days of the week are just as important in terms of worship. The greatest thing isn't that we get recognition from our peers, our family, our friends, or something like that, although those are good things, and we should celebrate when something great happens. That's good. But the greatest thing is that our actions would be a drink offering to the Lord that could be poured out. That one day when Jesus looks at us, he says, well done, my good and faithful servant. And that means this: every Christian act is a holy war. When we think of holy war, we probably get some bad images in our mind, and I totally understand that. We probably think of perhaps the Crusades or maybe suicide bombers or something like that. This week, I looked into holy wars, and the reason I bring this up is because these things that are happening in the books of 1st, 2nd Samuel, books of Joshua, all the kings and all these things are labeled as holy wars. And so I did a little more research into what all this means, and scholars don't actually agree a lot on what the definition of a holy war is, but the best I could find was in Britannica, cited my source. If you notice, Britannica said this: holy war, any war fought by divine command for a religious purpose. Examples that it gives include like the book of Joshua and things like that. And so as I said earlier, and I told you to pay attention to this, that we have to understand that we're no longer fighting physical religious wars. That's not what we do anymore. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He says that we're still at war, but it's not physical. It's not in this world. He says, for our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. In fact, when you look at the life of Christ, he was seen as a troublemaker. And when they thought that he was going to be this revolutionary that would go and start a war and take a throne in Jerusalem and destroy Rome, that's not what he does. What does he do? He goes to a cross. He fights a spiritual battle. You see, but as Christians, we have to understand that every act that we do is either fighting for the kingdom of light or fighting for the kingdom of darkness. Let's look in Ephesians 5, what the Apostle Paul says. He says, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light consists of goodness, righteousness, and truth, testing what is pleasing to the Lord. Don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness, but instead expose them. So we all need to ask ourselves the question, which side am I fighting for? Am I fighting for the kingdom of light, or am I fighting for the kingdom of darkness? And when we think about that, and we think about how every act is a holy war, as I said, a holy spiritual war, and in that sense, every action that we take is a holy something. You rest on holy days. You eat holy meals. You discuss and have holy conversations. You celebrate at holy parties. You holy scroll through social media. You holy watch entertainment. You work a holy job. You parent a holy home. You love in holy friendships, and you covenant in holy marriages. Everything we do is a holy something. These actions aren't just flippant choices, but are acts of spiritual warfare. That if you've trusted in God, you're in the list of God's mighty warriors. And you either fight for light and against darkness, or the other way around. So which team do you find yourself fighting for the most? Which team do you find yourself fighting for the most? It may sound like a lot of pressure, but I want to bring a little bit of relief as we close out. Fourth point today. Every victory is God's means that you're not the hero. Again, let's read both verses 10 and 12 say this: the Lord brought about a great victory that day. As great as these warriors were, the credit in all these exploits that they do, these great courageous acts, goes to the Lord. They were just instruments used by God. And they were courageous, but they didn't have to be the heroes. In fact, they were courageous because they weren't the heroes. They didn't have to be the heroes. God was the hero. They were just instruments in his hands. They were being faithful to do what God had called them to do, to stand their ground and fight the enemies as they came in. That's how they could be brave. They knew they weren't the hero. And I want to tell you this, and I tell you this in absolute love today. You're not the hero. You're not the hero. And you're not that important. Maybe one day your name will be remembered in a book sometime. Maybe if you're extremely blessed, your name will be remembered for 3,000 years like these guys. Hopefully, maybe your great-grandchildren one day will remember you. Even all this, the credit for the things that they did goes to the Lord. My second semester in college, I really enjoy space, kind of like hobby, just like watch space videos on YouTube really is all I do. But I like it. I think it's fun. So anyway, I've always kind of been this way. And, when I was a kid, wanted to be an astronaut, all that stuff. Not smart enough for that. Terrible at math. So I took astronomy, though. I was like, oh, that'd be fun. I can go take astronomy, and I can learn about the stars. And I get in there and realize it's just a math class. Like, it's a physics class about the stars. And I was like, oh, boy, I'm going to fail this real hard. This is going to be real bad. And so I get in there, and I'm like, a 50 was a good grade for me. I just did not have the background knowledge, and it was bad. It was so bad. Well, there was one project at the end of the semester that could save me, not give me a good grade, but just get me a passing grade so I didn't fail in my second semester of college. And I get in this group, and the group is awesome. Just God really blessed me with a great group. There was a carpenter in the group, and he made a working model of the solar system out of wood. I was like, whoa, this is just in awe that somebody could actually do this. At the end of the semester, our project is sitting there in the classroom, and on the little plaque are all the names, including my name. You know how much I did for that? Almost nothing. I mean, I was there at the meetings when things were being discussed, but the actual skill that I contributed to that project was very little. And it wasn't because I didn't want to, it wasn't because I didn't try or anything. I just didn't have a lot to give. But the grade went to me, even though the grade and the credit went to me, even though truly this guy deserved the credit for what was done. You know, in a sense, he was my hero. And I passed by his effort. And that's a little like Jesus. So you're not the hero. You're not the hero of the story, but Jesus is. And I don't say that to make you mad. I don't say that to make you anxious. I say that to comfort you. I want to give you peace, to help you not be as anxious, because the world doesn't rest on your shoulders. It rests on the shoulders of Christ, of God. You don't have to be the hero. You can stop. Just do your best. And take a day off, for heaven's sakes. Listen, every time you take a day off is an act of resistance that you are saying the world doesn't own me, that I trust God enough that I can take one day of my week and I can give it to the Lord and I can rest on this day because I trust that the world's not on my shoulders, but it is on His, and I know He's in control. You're not the hero, and that is a good thing. See, the world is on Jesus' shoulders, and we know He can handle it. Jesus is the true hero and the main character of the story, and He claimed victory on the cross that you can find rest in Him. This is what Jesus says to us, and this is what He tells us as we look for this rest. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." On the cross, Jesus went to battle against the forces of darkness, and He won, and we know He won because He rose from the dead, proving that He actually won on the cross. And on the cross, Jesus got your credit for your sin, and you got His credit. Today, victory can be yours, not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, not because you're the hero, but because He loves you. And He loves you so much that you get credit for His project. Today, that's the gospel. You don't have to be the hero. You can trust in Him. You can rest and find rest in Him. Today, if you need that peace, I want to encourage you to follow Him, to truly trust in Him. In the areas, if you're a Christian today, in the areas where you have a hard time, like giving those things over, and you find yourself having areas of anxiety and stress and all those things, those are typically the areas that we need to work on in releasing to God. And when you feel that, say, okay, I need to release this, Lord. I need to give this to you. Today, if you're not a believer, I want you to find the peace that Christ offers. In a minute, I'm going to pray a prayer. I just always want to make sure that everybody understands the prayer doesn't save you, but the prayer, if it is sincerely what's in your heart, can express what God has done in you. If you want to say, Jesus, I want to follow you today, I encourage you to pray this prayer in just a minute. Let's pray together. If you want to follow Christ today, you can pray something along these lines. Say, Dear Jesus, I know that I've done wrong. I know that I've hurt people. I know that ultimately I've hurt you. Lord, I know that I have sinned. But Jesus, today, forgive me of my sins. Free me from the stress. Free me from the anxiety of having to do it on my own. Today I give it to you and trust that you save me. I believe that you died on the cross for me in my place, forgiving my sins, and you proved it by rising from the dead. Save me, Jesus. Amen.
This media has been made available by Arborway Community Church in Boston, Massachusetts. At Arborway, we invite people to walk with Jesus together. If you would like to check out more resources, learn about Arborway Community Church, or donate to this ministry, please visit arborwaychurch.com.